work day ahead of you and all the emails and phone calls that you got to go through and probably deal with, and the workload, and we're behind and all this good stuff. So I'm going to try and rip through this, and if for some reason I stop talking or get shot, it's because I'm probably disclosing too much information in someone's eyes, and maybe from D&D or from somewhere else. And anyway, jokes aside, really seriously, I want to talk a little bit about mission security. You may recall last year we discussed the matters of physical security, and the first year I talked about the anatomy of a move and how we handle data center moves, and the second year I talked about the complexity of designing and planning for a facility. We talked about blasting, we talked about standoff, we talked about all kinds of real physical matters that tie also to IT, for example, the fencing, the perimeter fence, how we deal with that, to notice a potential hostile or perpetrator trying to come in on your property, and how that's handled, what tools there are in place. This is an interesting set of challenges that I was requested to do maybe some research on indirectly at a particular Crown department. That anyway, I'm going to present my findings, and I'm not presenting anything new. If you're in this business, you probably already know this, but what is interesting is the outcome of this, and I hope that it provokes some thought for all of us. Once again, just like all of these, there's nothing that's right or wrong or absolute. It's really all here to help us think and be better at what we do. So, in terms of IT security, watch, this is not going to work for me. We have the concept of logical separation. We deal with all kinds of fancy tools in our SIM and protection and detection, and all these fancy things that we put in place in technology. We discussed last year the concept of going from copper to fiber for the emissions off the copper, and what we can do, and how that proliferates through different methods, and then we also we should touch base. Another form of security is the concept of cryptography or encryption. Obviously, this is a quantum view, which is not available right now, but it is still an interesting concept, and so that is one method. Another method that we use is air gaps, and and nation states use some ComSec material as well. I'm not here to talk in detail about these, but just let's say these are some of the technologies and capabilities or ideas, concepts that get used, and there's more. I'm not touching base on all of them. There's no need to make a comprehensive list because I don't think anybody can. So then we talk about the concept of testing keyboard emanation. So I was sitting in a room, and there's some deployments of some equipment going around, and they said, well, we're doing all these fancy technology things that are up on this slide here, and so therefore I should be safe, and everything's good, and everything's great. And I said, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. How are you going to use it? Where are you going to use it? Where's it going to be? Sean's sitting over here. He and I had ad nauseum conversations, beat each other up over it, and came up with some good outcomes. But the testing was really fun for me. So the concept of keyboard emanations, there's audio emanations, obviously, as you type and make clicking sounds. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the electromagnetic signals that come out of your devices, and what can be done, or what's the challenges around that. So in my case here, we have a test case of a keyboard creating some noise. Let's just call it like that, electrical noise at the time. And I'm going to stand up for this a little bit here. And we have in my test case, I have a small room where I can test these things and manage them, so that I'm not interfering with other signals, and other signals are not interfering with me. So in this particular space, I threw up an old IBM ThinkPad laptop, which was, to my luck, very useful. In that ThinkPad laptop, I removed the power supply, thank God the battery still works, and I plugged in a little USB keyboard, and even, I could have used a PS2 because it's an old laptop, but I didn't, I just used a USB keyboard in this case here, and I used a 1 meter copper wire loop antenna, which I plugged into my oscilloscope into input 1, and I put all this in this fancy little room, and had, of all things, my daughter, a 13-year-old, go in the room. Yeah, she was getting permeated with all these signals. It was kind of neat. And I said, press each key, because she can hear me in there. And press each key individually, and let's see what happens. So on the scope, when I finally dialed it down and got the triggering right, and the frequency range, I saw more than just noise. And that's not new. None of this is new. So you press a key, and I was able to capture all these signals, and it was really neat. I felt like I was learning something, and so as she pressed the letter A, obviously not with any other key, just the letter A, the noise that finally comes out that you can see is exactly that, 11 bits that just kind of fly through. And it's analog, so you see these rises and drops and rises. So when you convert that to digital, because clearly it's digital, because the keyboard functions on a clock, and the clock rate responds back, and there's varying rates. That's why there's anywhere between 10 kilohertz and 15 kilohertz, so it's, you know, low frequency in the sense of emissions. You see this, and then if I can do a trigger on the edge, in this case the falling edge as it drops, not as it rises, then I can see that I can create a more digital signal out of it, and you can see these fancy bits that are going on. So I'm dumbing it down really because I got to cruise through this thing, and I'm not trying to teach anybody tradecraft, but the idea is that it's doable. And not only is it doable, but this is what it looks like. So if that's your clock coming out of that one of the wires on your, say, old 5-pin keyboards, you may recall 5-pin DIMMs, there's a clock signal going through to ground, and then there's the data signal that when you press a key, it sends a little signal. And that's essentially what it's doing. So normally the data signal is high, it drops down to low, saying somebody hit a key. And then 8 bits come out, boom, that's the key you pressed. And then after that, there's a parity. So the parity is basically describing those 8 bits. And if they're all basically in this case, if they add up to an even or odd, there's a parity value that's assigned. And then finally, it goes up back to high, saying, I'm done. And it's happened so fast that you can type really fast, and it doesn't interfere. Because if you're typing faster than 10 kilohertz-ish, I'm impressed. Anyway, so I said, you know what, let's map up the keyboard as best as I can. And there you go, it's decoded for you. Those are hexadecimal values that I mapped out. And there's some keys that I didn't even understand what the heck was coming through. My goal was not to decode the entire keyboard. My goal was to say, is it possible? That's it. Is it possible, and what can I do with that? So now that I've got this, and essentially to explain to the Crown that, look, if you're going to do this in this use case, take this computer here, do that computer there, and behave in this way, and potentially have classified information on there, where should you consider some of those, how should you consider some of those risks? That's all. Just think about it. So now, if I can pick up that signal, clearly I'm in a room where there's no other signals. Let's test it outside. So I went forward and I did some other research, and my interesting findings was I was able to pick up these signals outside my house. So on the street, I'm kind of sitting out there, and I've got this shitty little oscilloscope, may I say, and it looks boring. I've got a big extension cord going out to the street, so maybe that's acting as an antenna. I have no idea. At the end of the day, I was able to pick up signals from inside my home, whereby there's multiple computers running, and also my neighbor's noises, but pointed at a directional antenna, using a different little dipole, but directional antenna that I could pick up the signal from my home. Say, hey, you know what, there's multiple keyboards that are being used in here, but they're all different frequencies, even ever so slightly. As a 10 to 16 is quite a range. So now I can pinpoint down to a keyboard, and that's very interesting. And what's equally interesting is I was absolutely able to isolate it. And if I'm able to isolate it, what I thought was, what about keyboard encryption? So I did some reading, and I found there's a tremendous amount of information. I didn't even have to do the test, I could have read about it. But there's no fun in that. And in this one example of this paper that was written quite some time ago, in early 2000s, this fellow did a very similar test and didn't map out the whole keyboard, but he proved it with the letter E that it's doable. And he did it in an office space where there's a good number of about 100 keyboards and well over 20 meters away, and he's picking up these signals, and he's able to decode them on a computer. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm doing it like maybe a pinch of the way, which I'm able to pick up the signal and see it on my oscilloscope, and I can see this in digital waveform, and it's like, wow, that's cool. This guy went even a step further and tied that digital waveform into something that can decode it on his computer and say, oh, that's this letter E, because you press it, I know it's the letter E. And that's the example he gave. So I said, all right, that's kind of interesting. And like I said, this is old tradecraft. Basically, I learned that I wasted my time, but it was fun. So let's create a scenario here. And Sean, I know you know this, so you're going to beat me up in a question, I'm sure, later on. Sean and I have had a large conversation about this. Let's pretend I'm not a friendly. And I have this little software-defined radio that I can create, maybe with a little USB connector, and I can power it up with 5 volts ground, good to go. I put that in my jacket pocket right here. I'm gonna go to the bank. Out of that little radio is an antenna that I'm gonna wrap around my arm. I'm gonna have a little wrist strap, maybe copper wire, just to add that extra oomph of picking up signals. I'm gonna go to the bank and I'm gonna say, you know what, on this little phone here, I got a really weird, I don't know what it is. My account's not showing up right. Can you log in and take a look? Hey, sir, come on in the back here. We'll sit down in the office and we'll go through it together. Sounds great, because nobody wants to have wrong banking information. I sit down in the room and I reach over and put my hand towards the keyboard wire, because it's a wire that makes the noise. So that's the antenna. And I pointed at it, and my little software-defined radio connected to my Raspberry Pi is picking up these signals. Not only is it picking it up, but it's decoding it, because the Raspberry Pi processor is operating at a higher frequency than 10 or 16 kilohertz. And I can actually come and time slice it and slow it down and take up less battery time as well if I choose to. So I'm thinking about this and I'm saying, wow, okay, that's a really interesting use case that I can say in a bank, but then I need access to the terminal. But maybe I don't care about the terminal, maybe I just care about the data, how you communicate, what you communicate, who you're communicating with. And if I can do that from outside of the building, how comfortable are you? Okay, so over here, I said, you know what, let's talk a little bit about display signals. So it's the keyboards, that's really cool, but it's not 100% accurate. I have mapped out all the keys. Maybe if the data comes really fast, I'm gonna have really trouble decoding, because it takes time to decode on the computer. I get that. But at least my little use case may be possible. And if I can read about it and potentially think about it, see the circuits and do it, I'm sure, like we said earlier, some kid who's capable will do the same. And that is actually pretty threatening. So I'll get to that in a second here. So what about displays? Obviously when I look at it, it's emanating a signal because I can see it, right? But maybe that's coming off a wall and I can pick that up, maybe that's great, but really, what's happening? Well, there's likely a digital or analog signal traveling from a wire inside the computer, in a laptop in my case, going to the display. And that wire, like on the keyboard, is acting like an antenna. And it's making all this kind of noise. I'm thinking, let's test the concept of that. I said, it's too complex for me to test with my little poor man's equipment in my little home. There's a horizontal, vertical, and then sync for each one of those. And if I could line them up and know what the screen is sending, is it what frequency, and then what frequency are the pixels coming up, it's pretty complex. And certainly not something that I had the time to do for the Crown, if I may say, in this test case. But I said, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something. So I thought, in my mind, you know what? Let me theorize. I believe the analog signals will be easier to deal with because I was trained in analog. and in the sense that I read a little bit more, because that's great learning is reading and doing some research, and this fellow here wrote an amazing, ridiculous number of pages of a paper describing everything from analog to digital, DVI connectors, and the concept of HDMI and DVI being very similar, and how he was able to do certain things. And here's some outcome of what he's picking up. And that's just your brown fox jumping over the blah, 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 blah. And that's kind of cool. That's actually so cool that he can pick that up. And he's not doing anything fancy. Like 12 frames, 350 megahertz. I mean, you could buy that oscilloscope for like a few $1,000. That's pretty cool. And then I could decode that in a little cheap little computer with a parallel board. Holy crap, that's old stuff, man. That could be like an AT computer. Okay, wow, that's pretty neat. And this is, again, old tradecraft. So he says, what about digital signals? So he has this in his paper, and I'm literally lifting it out of his paper so that you can see his work. It's not my work, it's his work. It has more weight than Neal. And you can see here, okay, so if this is the idea, and what he's saying is, what if I were to try and hide my text, not have it black on white or white on black, but have it such that it's so obfuscated possible, that it's even difficult for me to read it when I'm looking at the screen. Could I help with my animation? So, look at that. That's cool, fascinating, okay? Fascinating for me because I'm not in this business of tradecraft, but the idea of dealing with the emanation and seeing that this is coming off the screen and he's picking it up meters away. Meters away. That's pretty amazing. So if I can pick up your keyboard meters away, that's your screen meter, do you really care if you have encryption? Huh. Well, you have encryption on your data line. You might have encryption on your equipment. But I don't care. And that really poses a problem. And that's one of the reasons we were talking. Ken, are you still sitting there, or are you gone, or there you are? We were talking about, last year we spoke about standoff from your facility. And the challenge of dealing with that in city spaces. Downtown, you're gonna have a building right on the edge of the property saying, look at my gorgeous building! And all of a sudden, well, you know, I could park my car outside, I could go in your lobby, I could go in the toilets on the floor, I could take an elevator and get somewhere in bed. Bam, guess what? Or plant something in your electrical room and have fun. So, if somebody's deadly interested, I'm not saying in your information or my information necessarily, I certainly not hope not yours, and I certainly hope at the corporate espionage level this is not something, but definitely at a state level, it's concerning. So, I tested it with a Surface Pro, because the case in this example here that I'm going to talk about is exactly what the Crown came up to me and said, hey, we're going to use these tablets, and how do they function? What can we do? Like, is this really a problem, or is this, like, Neal, like, it's new technology. It's got to be better than that. So the Surface has this keyboard attachment that you can snap into it, and it also has a keyboard on screen. And what happens, I was really curious, if I press the keys on screen, does it still send the signaling through the wire inside and emit that noise, and how does it behave? Because at the end of the day, it's a computer. And it has to use some common protocol method so that I'm not creating something new just for tablets, because it's still a computer. And the equipment remains the same. You wouldn't want to have some special method of doing that through the software. If you have to do it through software and hardware, it's extra work. So I thought, hey, maybe there's something to this. So clearly, I was able to say keyboards make noise. And I hate to say it, even on the Surface, the display makes noise. It's difficult for me to decode, but I'm sure if I spent time and had that effort to do that instead of plan this event, I could have probably done something a little bit better. And travel around the globe with Bruce, you know, that's always fun too. But realistically speaking, if I put my time to it, I bet you, I'm very certain, in fact, there's no betting, I'm very certain I can decode it. And keep in mind, I'm using the term decode, not decrypt. It's not encrypted, it's just obfuscated. It's difficult to see until you actually understand what frequency. You know what's really cool is, and I had a conversation with somebody else, the concept of that little VGA port that you guys have, the 15-pin DIN connector, you don't use it anymore maybe, or maybe you do. That wire that you may connect to it acts as an antenna, and I can pick up all that fun stuff, and you know, theoretically I can do the exact same thing, not theoretically, actually, and that's tradecraft that's well known in the art. Years old. But what if I don't connect that wire? And what if I connect an HDMI connector or a different type of digital line into my monitor? Can that little D-sub still make noise? And if you shoot that D-sub with a sync that's very similar to your monitor, horizontal vertical sync, guess what? The video card lights it up. And it starts just making noise. So you have a little speaker of emissions coming out of that little D-sub if one could direct the sync signal to that port. And that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. I don't know. You guys are all quiet. I think it's cool. Anyway, so obviously on the screen then, if you're using the screen, I don't really care if it makes noise through the wire because I'm going to pick it up on the screen. You press a key on the keyboard, on the screen, on the Surface tablet. So what you're seeing, one could see. What you're typing, one can see. And how far away? Well, the best thing about this is it was functional for me outside the shielded room. So that proves, hopefully to the Crown in this case, that are you really willing to take on this responsibility on behalf of other departments if you're delivering this as a service? And that's really where it came down to. You're delivering a service, who's accountable if the data gets lost? And who's going to be in the newspaper? Because that's really what suffers. So, okay, so that's an interesting point. It works outside the shield. So let's talk about ITSG33. I'm sure some of you have slaved over it, if not almost all of you read it and or had a chance to review it. But they talk about threat agents, and they have them as TD5, TD6, and all the way to TD7. So basically, TD7 is a nation state at war, TD6 is a nation state, TD5 is organized crime or large multinational companies who have the ability to do a lot more with their money. So if I read this, that's their kind of bullets around that, TD6 and above. You know, they're more concerned about these challenges here, and they're capable because they have that skill set, that money, that time they can invest in doing this type of vector of attack. Okay, so this is interesting, but I just talked about how a high school student could possibly do this. So, things you should probably consider are who's coming to your building? What are they leaving behind? What other occupants are in your building? Are you renting space, leasing space? Who's above, below, around you? Who has access to the toilets on the same floor? Like I said, the electrical room, all those good things. And what about surrounding buildings? Buildings downtown are so frickin' close, I could be outside in the neighboring building and pick up signals. And if I can direct them, this guy proved in his paper, there's 100+ computers in his room, and he's in that space, and he's able to pinpoint that one keyboard. That's pretty magical. And this guy's just a researcher. Imagine if he had real money, not research money. What could he do? So I'm not going to dwell too much on this. This is an example layout of a space. And imagine the blue space being, and I'm just going to whip through this because there's no need to detail on this thing, but there's a public zone, as we call it in the security space, the physical security. We talked about this last year. Public zone, reception zone, your operations zone. And imagine a person, a client walking through, or an agent walking through, somebody's staff walking through. They come to the reception area, and then they walk into this office space, and they say, oh, hey, I can do my work and get out or visit or whatever it might be. And then this little door here is a kind of an interesting back door that jump zones, and it sucks. But you know what? These kind of examples are not fake. They're realistic examples. So now if I see that and I can get it, let's say we close that space and we make this space like our LAN room, and we want to say that that's really secure. That's where nobody goes. Unless we want them to, unless they have a need to. Maybe it's TPI, maybe it's a variety of things. But I'm just going to make sure that that is my zoning. If that's my zoning, theoretically, and I close up that access, and over here I want to put my computer, well, that's how much noise it makes at 8 meters. And it makes a ridiculous amount of noise at 8 meters. And that's how much it does at 20 meters. If you pick up that signal beyond that, you have to be a little bit more magical in your amplification and dealing with the other noise that's around. But hey, that's interesting. It's encroaching on the space of my neighboring tenant. It's also not just horizontal. We got to think of all your Cartesian coordinate planes and say, wow, this is going up, down, outside, everywhere. Holy crap. What's on that computer? And maybe it's air gapped. Maybe it's just a computer that I'm walking around with. Maybe it's my laptop. I park it down, I fire it up. And if I am somebody of importance, that might not be a good idea for me to have. So this white line is, let's say it's a copper line. We talked copper fiber last year. Let's say it's a copper line. Well, that's another antenna. It's connected to my computer. Let's say, for example, into my fancy security zone. So basically, in my little red zone, security zone, out to the operation zone, I got this fancy wire, and it's making noise out of the wire, and it just goes, it's a fancy copper antenna. But right next to that is this little electrical room with a grounding bus bar going up and down. And that grounding bus bar is going to pick up that compromising emanation off your copper wire. That's so cool! And I could be in a different building floor, way below, and potentially capture that off the bus. So that's kind of neat. All right. Likelihood, impact. Should I really worry about it? I don't know. Let's take another single story example. There's your reception area, because outside's public, and let's say this is your operation, and let's say that's your little IT room. And when we look at this space, let's say the inside room is pretty much there. That's adjacent to this other zone, not cool. That's adjacent to walls. Maybe I want to put a computer in there to sort of manage that space. So let's just say that that's my zoning. And in here goes this little terminal or a computer or something like that. Or I turn it on every once in a while. It's an air gap machine. Hey, I'm going to do some fancy stuff on there. Nobody needs to know. But it makes 8 meters and 20 meters of noise. And all of a sudden, in my reception area, my signals are permeating. In the meeting rooms of the reception area, where we may allow visitors to bring computers or terminals or other things, it's picking up. Or just come in, maybe without checking my pocket for my fancy toys. And guess what? Are you really at risk? I don't know. It's not my decision to make, but it's just a concept of, hey, think about that before you plan to let anybody in your facility and operate. And this could be your data center. Let's walk ahead and say, yeah, actually that's an interesting point too. Are you using copper? Because it's going to make it even worse on you. So hopefully you're using fiber. And that's back to last year's conversation. I don't want to dwell on. But let's take a multi-story example. This is a floor of a Cisco facility. And let's say that's your public space that you're talking about. There's the elevator shaft. Over here's your reception area. You've got it really locked down low. And then this is your operating space, and that's your security zone, and that's where you want to keep your core of your secure stuff in your secure operation stuff that's in your facility or in your space. This is a multi-story building. Where do you put your devices to avoid the emanations? And yeah, you might say, well, you know what, I can obfuscate it because there's so much noise, there's so many devices. But when has obfuscation really been the winning solution when it comes to hiding or keeping stuff close to your heart? So I'll say, you know what, yeah, you're probably right. It's going to be really challenging to decode. Maybe I can't do it. Maybe you can't even do it. But maybe somebody else can. So all that to say, what does it all mean? And this picture here I have is very interesting to me because at the end of the day, I could be a high school student who's just interested in this because I'm a super geek. And I went online, like Bruce was saying, and I downloaded some guy's documents and software, and I was able to use it, maybe some code, maybe some schematics, and I'm really cool. And nobody follows me on Instagram because I'm a super geek, but I want to be as cool as those cool kids. And you know what? I can pick up some noise. And I know, because I'm in Ottawa, that there's some elected official. I'm going to pick up his noise. I sit outside his house, pick up some noise. I'm sure something cool is going to come out of that. And when I post that on Instagram, holy shit, I'm going to be the coolest guy on the street. Everyone's going to know me. So this person is not a hostile. He's not against your nation. He's just a Joe. How do you deal with that? So the concept of things to consider here, I mean, I'm really questioning, should CSE really consider, and again, this is no answer, yes or no, should they possibly consider revising their threat actors with the proliferation of this technology, the capability to say, you know what, these tools that we thought once were available at a real nation-state level, who have money to do this and capability, are really coming down. And they're actually coming down rapidly. And that individuals who really don't have the heart against your country, but maybe just interested in this, could compromise you. And should CSE consider, hey, you know what, maybe we should adjust our threat actors' capabilities. And then maybe we should also suggest talking to our CSOs in the corporate world, DSOs in the departmental security officers in the FedGov space, to say, hey guys, you know what, at the end of the day, this is your business for security, it's your business, you're responsible and accountable, both. So, just want to let you know that what we thought was, what we've been proliferating is information that, this is nation-state level information or nation-state level capability, or really high, financially capable, like organized crime or corporations. It's actually coming down lower. And the actual use of it is probably easier for these people in your country to do. Instead of, say, organized crime, we'll use traditional methods of extortion, sex, drugs, alcohol, that kind of fun stuff, which works really well too. Not that I hear it works well. Anyway, so what other, this begs the question that what other capabilities, I mean, we just kind of looked into these two because they came to surface saying, hey, can you figure this out? What's your opinion on that? So when we did this research, interesting, but what other capabilities that I don't even know about, but somebody should, or somebody does, have come down the chain of those threat actors that are now capable by these individuals who don't even understand the technology. And at once couldn't afford it, but now can. And can use it against you even though they're really not intending on it. And I think that's the bigger problem. So does it impact you? Maybe, maybe not. Could it impact you in the corporate world? I think it's quite highly likely. Can it impact you in the state, at the state level? I truly believe so. You don't know who's above you in some buildings. You don't know who's below you, especially in a neighboring building. And if that inspectable space, remember what inspectable space truly means, it's a space where you can evict somebody from, if you so desire or require. It's not just a space that you can go look and see and talk to the landlord and say, can I go take a look? No, you can evict them out of there. That's true inspectable space. So that's really what it is. And it was just a thought-provoking, there's no solution, there's no answer, I'm not presenting anything new, I'm certainly not presenting any fancy tradecraft, I haven't gone into any details, so please don't shoot me about questions about how or what. If you really want to know, I can send you the papers. I prefer not be the guy that says this is how it was done. I mean, I can answer general questions on that. It's not complex. You can figure it out. You guys are much more brilliant than I am. So, yeah, anyway, thought-provoking, hopefully. So, I will field and shield, I'm just kidding, any questions you have. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, just wondering how much more secure would you think a wireless keyboard with the encryption, just between that, be more secure almost than a wired one from that perspective?
I love that question. So the concept of wireless, you're making noise already, and at a frequency range that I absolutely love, which is in the 2.4 gigahertz-ish range. And then on top of that, think about your question, encrypted data. And then look up what encrypted data on keyboards are. And you'll realize that it's a manufacturer code that's assigned to the keyboard, and they do this fancy XOR-like behavior, and outcome is the data. So that's not encryption, that's obfuscation. So if I know the manufacturer's code, and there's not a whole pile of them that everybody uses, there's pretty common ones. Guess what, you could have some fun with that.
I knew that as a threat already, I didn't know the wired one, I'm just curious as to...
Definitely the wireless one is a complex, little different style, but certainly capable.
I thought it was really funny, that first screen you showed of the emissions picked up.
Yes.
That wasn't random brown fox, blah, blah, blah. It was a bit by
yes.
A bit by Van Eyck, who Van Eyck Freaking is named after.
Named after.
The emissions, yeah. I thought that was funny.
It's cute, yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to roll back to that screen.
Wasn't randomly picked.
No, it was very apropos. There you go. You can read the detail, but it starts off with just that one sentence, and I was hoping that his paper covers a lot of that, and it's really cool. If you want, really good reading, and if you're excited about this is I find it fascinating up there with the same idea of what Bruce talked about and what everyone's talked about so far. So, yeah,
and
absolutely.
As he was Dutch, I thought it was nice too, because I am as well. So.
Oh, excellent! You're not sporting the orange though.
No.
You're not Dutch royalty.
No, I wouldn't mind, but no.
Sean, I saw you lift your hand. I know you're going to beat me up with a question.
No. It's
Oh, this is going to be a dangerous one. All right, I'm putting up the shields right now. Here we go. Go. I thought it was cool.
No, I think it's great that you're opening this topic up to the audience. But it begs the question, what about other similar products like access control panels on data centers? Keypads, garage door openers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the whole concept of as you're opening up to the Internet of Things, or the mist area, the fog area, as you're saying, the whole concept of connected cities or enabled cities, I find it really dangerous. Like we're walking into a space whereby if somebody's really interested in knocking you out, holy crap, you have very little you can do, because we choose capability, I find, over security. And the concept of security and privacy was something that we talked about in Bruce and I don't know if we argued, but discussed, I think, ad nauseum, the concept of how privacy takes precedence, period, and then it goes to security, and then the state says, well, you got to offer more privacy, so we're not really poking around and looking at your stuff yet. But then all of a sudden, security becomes more important and privacy drops down. So yeah, it's a complex thing. It's a really complex thing, and at the end of the day, if somebody wants to compromise you, they can. It's really, are you really worth it? I don't know. It's a really big question. It's a crystal ball question. All right, I'm taking this.
We did similar testing in national defense for a slightly different reason. And they found that an easy mitigation measure was to put ferrite sleeves on all the cords. Did you explore any mitigation measures?
I didn't, and that's a very good point. On the wire, if that wire exists, but the problem is, I did this on a simple little device like this. And there is no wire on this device. It's a tablet that acts like a laptop with a little disconnectable, if I can do this anyway, keyboard. I can't really attach anything on this thing. And if this is being used in a variety of departments, organizations with material that's considered protecting national interests or national secrets, I sure hope you have a ridiculous amount of standoff.
There's a keyboard on this too.
There certainly is, yes, but that's, come on, your BlackBerry, I'm hoping you're not using that for classified comms. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, cool. Donna.
So I just want to, I guess in some ways, perhaps understand the perspective. Because one of the things I see with clients is that they routinely overclassify their information. So I was sitting in a meeting just last week where the client said, oh, well, we know it's protected A, we'll put it to protected B just in case.
Or even secret.
Or even secret. And that's just wrong. You're spending more time, money, et cetera, et cetera. It's the wrong thing to do for a whole variety of reasons. And so the first question is, we've got a certain level of paranoia that you're creating here, but these assets, are they worth protecting? Are they unclassified, even aggregated? Are they protected B? Because protected A, quite frankly, well, you may as well just, that's my phone book.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So I'll say this, I have a plethora of opinions on that, because that's all I can give. Reality is, it's that DSO and CSO's responsibility to tell you what their data is worth to them, and what's the impact, what's the CIA around that. It's not mine. And it's not mine to question it, especially as a consultant, it's not mine to question it. If that departmental security officer says, listen, that data is marked secret, they have more information than I do to make a decision. I kind of look at it like they get their intelligence from multiple sources, and I've used this example in the past. Let's say, for example, I go for security clearance, and they get an interview done, I have a financial review, I have a psych eval, I have a polygraph, and
Okay,
let's
so
say
top
there's just four
secret
things.
sickened is what you just described.
I'm not even
or
saying, I'm just
higher.
giving you an example of the information that they may digest. Let's say those 4 pieces of information, that's on personnel security, but let's say this DSO is responsible for the security of their facility, and they're saying, you know what, this, these are the physical challenges, these are logical challenges, these are personnel challenges, all that kind of stuff, and they have all that information. I don't. I'm not an informed decision maker for that department. And if that DSO says, you know what, our information is secret, I have no argument.
Right. Okay, and I don't disagree with that. But before the data center owners or builders get this level of concern, they should know what their assets are worth and whether the level of concern is worth it.
You raise an interesting point, yeah. I think to some degree, the Stuxnet thing opened up the door to the SCADA network attacks, let's say, for example, that, if I were to compare our facility design and segregation of networks to the NSA's, their building operations network is deemed unclassified, whereas ours is secret. And as such, when you declare it as secret, you might say, well, that's overclassified. If NSA can have it as unclassed, then why are we doing it secret? But maybe somebody in the department said, you know what, I want to protect that differently. And by declaring it secret, there's the spatial, all these challenges that you have to deal with, and more. And the whole policies about how to deploy and all those kinds of fun things. It's complex, I get it.
Well,
I'm not the answer.
We know that a lot of SCADA assets are critical infrastructure, and that whether it's secret, it's kind of a different category. It's critical infrastructure and should be protected as such. But that's a different discussion. I just want to refer to what you were saying about ITSG-33 and the different threat vectors, TD7, for example. Agents. Well, you were talking about Tempest. Well, one of the items was Tempest.
Yeah.
And that's a great one because
It is, but keep in mind, Tempest is only available for a select group of departments. I mean, not even departments, government only, really.
yes.
Not corporations. And yeah, you could use Tempest, but still a meter noise. So if I was in the electrical closet nearby, you're making a meter of a noise, you're still connected by copper cable, it's emanating off the copper cable. You better not say that any bit of that entire system is not Tempest, because the whole system has to be Tempest, not just your computer, the keyboard, the monitor, the wire that goes to it, the shielded copper if it is, then it connects, everything has to be qualified. And if one component of that is not, are you at risk? So it's a complex thing. I really agree with you that there is no real solution, and I'm not trying to present a solution or a fear. I'm just saying, hey, think about it. Think about it, because at the end of the day, if you're declaring it as a national interest matter, treat it like that.
If I'm Tempest qualified, then no one's walking through my facility who isn't.
You'd be surprised.
Really?
You should go see some deployments.
You're right. I probably should.
Just ask the gentleman sitting right next to you, other side. Any other? I survived it so far, I think. Thanks, Donna, for being gentle.
Yeah, hi Neil, that's great. Actually, the point that she was making up was a similar line that I was going to bring up here. And the whole premise of protecting the assets and the classification of that is also quite out of date. If you think about it in the way that the sensitivity of information, for example, what made something protected be or secret, and they said, well, the level of harm, so, you know, when it was assigned 25, 30 years ago, and we were essentially document to document level, a file, 2 or 3, a handful, maybe a briefcase full. Today, entire databases of information are potentially at risk, and you get this sort of a dichotomy between the asset and the classification and the protection there. So they'll say, protect B, oh, you can't do Tempest, or you don't qualify for Tempest. We don't need it. The level of risk is not high. Well, it's an aggregate. Oh, but aggregate is, and we've had this battle. You know, I'm certainly with you, and you know, I think that the aggregate issue is nowhere near being adequately considered. If you just think about it, you know, years ago, trivial information was trivial. Today, simple things, you know, the old classic, you know, your mother's maiden name can be the missing key to your bank accounts. Yeah. Your bank accounts in the government. What does the government treat that? Is that protected A, protected B? Certainly not secret, not confidential. Confidential is a classification level. They don't even have a mechanism for working at that level. So
your comments are almost like, how do I say, frustration comments that I hear.
Yeah. So, you know, and the ITSG, as a physical security guy trying to set standards and do TRAs and everything else, I'm constantly referring to that and looking at it saying, it's missing stuff. It's missing entire types and possibilities of attack. It doesn't properly, adequately address either the assets or the adversaries. And so I don't want to go on, but just to reiterate what you've been saying is, these attacks are possible if you don't protect them at the right level, if you've under-categorized them and therefore not considered that somebody is actually possibly going to be doing these things, then you're leaving the door open.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you and me as consultants, we're not the decision makers, definitely not the pen holders or holding the responsibility or accountability that may apply there. I think it comes back to the same sort of comment for CRA. When we were planning their move, the staff were saying all our data is protected B. When we move it in a truck, I don't really care. It's protected B, you know. And I took it all the way quite high at the time. There was this conversation I had with a particular individual whereby I said, listen, you know, if that grows legs or falls off, what are you going to do? Are you willing to tell your minister and so on and so forth, as I described previously? And he goes, well, no, I don't want to do that, but what can I do? We self-insure at the Crown. I said, well, it costs nothing to get RCMP, really $1,200 a day. You can get an RCMP car for 8 hours as a VIP escort. And guess what? They can cross borders. So there are mitigations that you can take in place. Doesn't mean that you're buying insurance. I think it comes down to what a little bit of what Jill, Ryan, Bruce, John have already said, is that it's experience, knowledge, and hopefully, you know, how often do these things move? How often do these things shift? Threat agents' capabilities shift down the ladder, and how many people have that experience of dealing with it? I certainly don't. I just have an experience of noticing it, maybe from a very distant vantage point. But you know, it's an interesting problem, and I don't know how it's going to get handled. But I think, you know, Sean and I've had multiple discussions at shared services about the complexity of that. And you folks from the RCMP probably have some perspective on that. You're probably going to keep tight-lipped, but I get it. And you folks from D&D have your own perspective, and I get it. But I think at the end of the day, you guys manage your security much differently. You don't even trust anyone else's security clearances. So put it in perspective, you're really sandboxed. Many other departments in the shared services model, shared services is now delivering a service for 40, technically 3, including themselves, departments. How does that handle? And are you, as a department, willing to take on the security posture and capability for all of those departments under your wing? Anyway, thank you.